Do you remember when Christmas candy came wrapped in wax paper, tied with ribbon, and handed to you by a neighbor who spent all afternoon in the kitchen? In the 1970s, before everything came shrink-wrapped from the supermarket, there were dozens of Christmas candies that families made at home. Candies your mother learned from her mother, recipes passed down and perfected over generations. Today, we're looking at 25 Christmas candies from the 1970s that have completely vanished from our holiday tables. And honestly, once you hear about them, you'll wonder why we ever stopped making them. Bourbon balls. Here's the candy your parents hid in the back of the cupboard, away from the kids. Bourbon balls were adults-only treats made with vanilla wafer crumbs, cocoa powder, chopped pecans, corn syrup, and real bourbon whiskey. Not bourbon flavoring, real bourbon. You'd mix everything together, roll the mixture into 1-inch balls, then coat them in powdered sugar or more cocoa powder. But here's the secret. You couldn't eat them right away. Bourbon balls needed to age in an airtight container for at least 3 days, preferably a week. During that time, the harsh alcohol flavor would mellow out and blend with the chocolate and nuts, creating this sophisticated, boozy sweetness that adults loved. In 1975, making a batch cost about $1.50, roughly $9 today, which was expensive but worth it for a special gift. Bourbon balls were particularly popular in Kentucky and the South, where bourbon wasn't just an ingredient, it was a point of pride. They disappeared when people became more cautious about homemade food containing alcohol, worried about kids accidentally eating them or the liability of giving them as gifts. Molasses taffy. Molasses taffy wasn't like the fruity taffy you know today. This was dark, rich, and tasted like concentrated gingerbread. Making it required molasses, sugar, butter, and a secret ingredient most people didn't know about, vinegar. Just a tablespoon or two prevented the sugar from crystallizing and kept the taffy stretchy instead of brittle. You'd cook everything to the hardball stage, pour it onto a buttered pan, let it cool just enough to handle, then start pulling. This was a family activity. Two people would grab opposite ends of the taffy and pull it apart, fold it back, pull it apart again, over and over for 10 to 15 minutes. As you pulled, the taffy would change from dark coffee brown to lighter caramel gold, and the texture would go from sticky to silky smooth with a satiny sheen. In 1975, a batch cost about 40 cents, roughly $2.50 today. Molasses taffy disappeared when pulling candy at home became obsolete. Modern families didn't gather in the kitchen for group activities anymore, and buying taffy was easier than spending 20 minutes pulling it. Divinity. Divinity was the candy that separated the serious home cooks from everyone else. This was not something you attempted on your first try. Divinity is a white, fluffy candy that looks like clouds and dissolves on your tongue like sweet snow. Making it required you to cook sugar syrup to 248 degrees, the hardball stage, then slowly pour it into stiffly beaten egg whites while beating constantly. The timing had to be perfect. Too fast, and the egg whites would scramble. Too slow, and the syrup would harden before it mixed. And here's the thing nobody tells you about Divinity. It absolutely will not work on a humid day. The moisture in the air would prevent it from setting, and you'd end up with a bowl of sticky goo instead of fluffy candy. Your grandmother knew to check the weather forecast before attempting Divinity. In 1975, a batch cost about 50 cents, maybe $3 today, but the effort involved made it feel precious. Divinity disappeared because people got tired of failing at it. When you could buy perfectly good candy at the store, why risk wasting an afternoon on something that might not work? Homemade peppermint patties. If you think your peppermint patties are good, you've never had a homemade peppermint patty from the 1970s. These were made with powdered sugar, softened butter, and pure peppermint extract, not peppermint flavoring. The difference is massive. Pure extract gives you this clean, intense mint flavor that tastes fresh instead of artificial. You'd mix the ingredients into a smooth fondant, shape them into discs, chill them until firm, then dip each one quickly through melted chocolate. The trick was keeping the chocolate coating thin and glossy, not thick and waxy like commercial versions. In 1975, a batch cost about 80 cents, roughly $5 today. These patties were special because they tasted like real peppermint, the kind that clears your sinuses and tingles on your tongue. Homemade peppermint patties disappeared when York patties became cheap and ubiquitous. Why spend an afternoon making them when you could grab a pack at the checkout counter? But anyone who remembers the homemade version will tell you the commercial ones taste like wax and chemicals in comparison. Opera creams. Opera creams had this mysterious, elegant name that made them sound fancier than they actually were. The name supposedly came from them being sold at opera houses in the 1800s, associated with high culture and sophistication. But really, opera creams were just vanilla fondant shaped into ovals and topped with half a pecan. The trick was in making the fondant itself, which required cooking sugar and cream to the softball stage, then kneading it on a cold marble slab until it turned pearly white and creamy smooth. This kneading process controlled the sugar crystals and created that melt-in-your-mouth texture that made opera creams special. In 1975, a batch cost about 70 cents, roughly $4.50 today. These were considered impressive to serve at parties because they looked professional and handmade. Opera creams disappeared when fondant making became a lost art. Most people today have no idea how to make fondant from scratch, and the candy seemed too plain and old-fashioned compared to chocolate truffles or fancier confections. If any of these candies are bringing back memories of your mother's kitchen at Christmas, hit like below and let us know which ones you remember. Butterscotch drops. Butterscotch drops were hard candies, translucent and golden like amber, that tasted purely of butter and caramelized sugar. Making them required a candy thermometer and nerves of steel. You'd cook sugar, corn syrup, and butter to 300 degrees Fahrenheit, the hard crack stage, then remove it from the heat and stir in vanilla. Here's where it got intense. You had maybe 60 seconds to drop spoonfuls of the molten mixture onto wax paper before it hardened in the pot. Any delay, and the sugar would seize up, making it impossible to work with. Each drop would cool into a smooth, glassy candy that tasted like pure butterscotch, the real kind made with butter, not artificial flavoring. In 1975, a batch cost about 35 cents, roughly $2 today. Butterscotch drops disappeared when commercial hard candies like Werther's Originals became available everywhere. But the homemade version was richer, more buttery, and had a flavor complexity that mass-produced candies couldn't match. Seafoam. Seafoam is Divinity's lesser-known cousin, made with brown sugar instead of white. That one change transforms it completely. Instead of being pure white, seafoam turns golden tan. Instead of tasting like sweet air, it tastes like butterscotch. The technique is identical to Divinity. Cook brown sugar and corn syrup to the hardball stage. Slowly pour it into beaten egg whites. Beat until stiff peaks form. But brown sugar is trickier to work with because it burns easier and the temperature is harder to judge. You'd end up with this light, airy candy that tasted richer and more interesting than Divinity, with deep caramel notes underneath the sweetness. A batch cost about 50 cents in 1975, roughly $3 today. Seafoam disappeared for the same reasons Divinity did. It was temperamental, humidity sensitive, and required skills most people didn't have. By the 1980s, easier candies had taken over, and seafoam became a forgotten relic of a time when people had patience for difficult recipes. Seafoam is Divinity's lesser-known cousin, made with brown sugar instead of white. That one change transforms it completely. Instead of being pure white, seafoam turns golden tan. Instead of tasting like sweet air, it tastes like butterscotch. The technique is identical to Divinity. Cook brown sugar and corn syrup to the hardball stage. Slowly pour it into beaten egg whites. Beat until stiff peaks form. But brown sugar is trickier to work with because it burns easier and the temperature is harder to judge. You'd end up with this light, airy candy that tasted richer and more interesting than Divinity, with deep caramel notes underneath the sweetness. A batch cost about 50 cents in 1975, roughly $3 today. Seafoam disappeared for the same reasons Divinity did. It was temperamental, humidity sensitive, and required skills most people didn't have. By the 1980s, easier candies had taken over, and seafoam became a forgotten relic of a time when people had patience for difficult recipes. Penuche. Let's start with Penuche, sometimes spelled Penuche or Penuche, which is basically fudge's more sophisticated cousin. Instead of using white sugar like regular fudge, Penuche uses brown sugar, which gives it this deep, almost caramel-like flavor that's richer and more complex than any chocolate fudge you've ever tasted. In the 1970s, making Penuche was considered a test of your candy-making skills. You had to cook the brown sugar, butter, and milk to exactly 236 degrees Fahrenheit, then cool it down to 110 degrees without touching it. The waiting was torture, but if you started beating it too soon, the whole batch would turn grainy instead of smooth. When you got it right, though, the result was this creamy, tan-colored fudge that melted on your tongue with flavors of butterscotch and caramel. A batch cost maybe 60 cents in 1975, about $4 today. Penuche disappeared when chocolate fudge took over the world and brown sugar, anything seemed old-fashioned. But people who remember it will tell you it was better than any chocolate fudge they've had since. Coconut bonbons. Coconut bonbons looked like little snowballs, and making them was an act of love. The filling was sweetened shredded coconut mixed with sweetened condensed milk and vanilla, rolled into 1-inch balls, and chilled until completely firm. That firmness was crucial. If the centers were too soft, they'd fall apart when you try to dip them in melted chocolate. You'd work quickly, using a fork to dip each ball through the chocolate, then set them on wax paper to harden. The result was a candy with a smooth chocolate shell and a sweet, moist coconut center that tasted tropical and rich. In 1975, a batch cost about $1, roughly $6 today. Coconut bonbons were perfect for making in large quantities because once you got into a rhythm, you could knock out dozens in an hour. They disappeared when coconut fell out of fashion and people started buying those Mounds bars instead. But the homemade version was fresher, less sweet, and the coconut actually tasted like coconut instead of sugary fluff. Pralines. Pralines are a New Orleans specialty, but in the 1970s, they spread across the country and became a Christmas tradition in many homes. A praline is a flat, round candy made with brown sugar, cream, butter, and pecans, cooked to the softball stage and then beaten until it just starts to thicken and turn cloudy. This is where speed matters. You have maybe 30 seconds to spoon the mixture onto wax paper before it hardens in the pot. If you hesitate, you'll end up scraping out a solidified mass instead of individual candies. The result is a candy that's crispy on the outside, creamy on the inside, with that deep caramel flavor from the brown sugar and the rich, buttery crunch of pecans. In 1975, a batch cost about $1, roughly $6 today. Pralines disappeared from most home kitchens because the timing was tricky and regional candies became less common. Chocolate fudge took over as the default Christmas candy, and pralines retreated back to Louisiana where they belonged. Maple creams. Maple creams were a luxury candy, reserved for special occasions, because they required genuine maple syrup, which was expensive even in the 1970s. You'd heat the maple syrup, then beat it with butter and powdered sugar until it turned pale and creamy, similar to making fondant. The mixture would be kneaded on a cold surface until it became smooth and opaque, then shaped into small rectangles or diamonds. The flavor was pure maple, rich and woody, tasting like Vermont in December. In 1975, a batch cost about $1.50, roughly $9 today, making these one of the pricier candies to make at home. Maple creams were particularly popular in New England, where maple syrup was a local product and a source of regional pride. They disappeared when maple flavor became associated with cheap pancake syrup, and people forgot what real maple syrup tasted like in candy form. The few people who still make maple creams guard their recipes carefully. Peanut brittle. Peanut brittle looked simple, but held a secret that made it special. You'd cook sugar, corn syrup, and water to the hard crack stage, stir in butter and peanuts, then add a teaspoon of baking soda. The baking soda caused a dramatic reaction, making the mixture foam and bubble violently. Those bubbles created thousands of tiny air pockets throughout the candy, which made it brittle instead of rock hard. You could bite through it easily, and it would shatter into pieces instead of breaking your teeth. The flavor was sweet, nutty, and buttery, with the roasted peanuts adding depth. In 1975, a batch cost about 70 cents, roughly $4 today. Peanut brittle disappeared when people became afraid of working with 300-degree sugar syrup. The process was genuinely dangerous if you weren't careful, and store-bought peanut brittle was safer and easier. But homemade brittle was thinner, crispier, and loaded with more peanuts than the commercial versions. Peppermint bark. Peppermint bark became trendy again in recent years, but in the 1970s, it was a homemade Christmas candy that required some skill. You'd spread a layer of dark chocolate onto a parchment-lined pan. Let it set, then spread a layer of white chocolate on top. Before the white chocolate hardened, you'd sprinkle crushed candy canes all over the surface. The key was tempering the chocolate, so it would stay crisp at room temperature instead of getting soft and melting on your fingers. Most home cooks didn't temper properly, so their peppermint bark would get sticky after a day or two. In 1975, a batch cost about $1, roughly $6 today. Peppermint bark disappeared when chocolate work became intimidating and people stopped making layered candies at home. It came back in the 2000s as a trendy gourmet item, but the homemade version was never quite as perfect as people remembered. Butterscotch fudge, made with brown sugar, milk, butter, and butterscotch chips. It had a deep caramel flavor that tasted like liquid gold. The technique required cooking brown sugar and butter to exactly 236 degrees, stirring constantly to prevent burning. When you removed it from the heat, you'd immediately stir in butterscotch chips, which would melt from the residual heat and blend into the mixture, deepening the butterscotch flavor. Then came the cooling to 110 degrees and the vigorous beating until the fudge thickened and lost its shine. The result was smooth, rich fudge that melted on your tongue with flavors of brown sugar, butter, and caramel. In 1975, a batch cost about $1, roughly $6 today. Butterscotch fudge disappeared because the technique was demanding and butterscotch flavor fell out of fashion. Chocolate dominated everything, and butterscotch became associated with old people and hard candies. Cherry cordials. Cherry cordials were those fancy boxed candies with the liquid centers, but in the 1970s, some ambitious home cooks made them from scratch. The process involved wrapping maraschino cherries in fondant, letting them age for several days, then dipping them in chocolate. Here's the magic. Some recipes used an enzyme called invertase, which would gradually liquefy the fondant center over 3 to 5 days. Most home cooks didn't have invertase, so they relied on the moisture from the cherries slowly breaking down the fondant naturally. It was unpredictable, but when it worked, you'd bite into the chocolate shell and liquid cherry syrup would burst out. In 1975, making cherry cordials cost about $1.50, roughly $9 today. They disappeared because the aging process was unreliable, invertase was hard to find, and commercial cherry cordials were cheap and convenient. But homemade ones tasted fresher, less artificial, and the chocolate was real dark chocolate instead of that waxy coating on store-bought versions. Turkish Delight. Turkish Delight was the exotic candy from the lion, the witch, and the wardrobe, and in the 1970s, some adventurous home cooks tried making it. The candy is a chewy gel made with gelatin, cornstarch, sugar, and flavoring, usually rose water or lemon. Rose water was the authentic flavor, intensely floral and unlike anything else on the American Christmas candy plate. You'd cook the mixture until it became thick and translucent, pour it into a pan, let it set overnight, then cut it into cubes and dust them with powdered sugar. The texture was soft and chewy, and the rose flavor was polarizing. People either loved it or hated it. In 1975, a batch cost about $1, roughly $6 today. Turkish Delight disappeared because the rose flavor was too unfamiliar for most Americans. It tasted like perfume to people who weren't used to floral desserts. The candy retreated to specialty stores and Middle Eastern markets, and most Americans forgot it existed. Coconut ice. Coconut ice is a British candy that found its way into American Christmas traditions during the mid-20th century. It's a two-layered fondant candy, with a bottom layer white and the top layer dyed pink. The recipe is simple. Shredded coconut, sweetened condensed milk, and powdered sugar mixed together divided in half, with one half tinted pink. You'd press the white layer firmly into a pan, then press the pink layer on top, chill it until firm, and cut it into squares. The texture is slightly grainy but sweet, and the coconut flavor is intense and tropical. In 1975, a batch cost about 50 cents, roughly $3 today. Coconut ice disappeared because layered candies seemed fussy and time-consuming compared to simpler options. The pink and white colors also felt dated as candy trends moved toward chocolate-dipped everything. But for people who grew up with coconut ice, those pink and white squares represent a gentler, simpler time. Chocolate fudge. Chocolate fudge was the gold standard, the recipe every home cook in the 1970s tried to master. Real fudge, not the kind made with marshmallow cream, required cooking sugar, milk, chocolate, and butter to exactly 236 degrees, the softball stage. Then came the hardest part, cooling the mixture to 110 degrees without stirring it. No stirring. None. If you stirred too early, large sugar crystals would form and the fudge would be grainy instead of creamy. Once it cooled, you'd beat it vigorously for 5 to 10 minutes until it lost its shine and thickened, then pour into a buttered pan and cut it into squares. The result was smooth, creamy fudge that melted on your tongue with the flavor of real chocolate and butter. In 1975, a batch cost about 80 cents, roughly $5 today. Traditional chocolate fudge disappeared when people stopped using candy thermometers and switched to those easy microwave recipes using marshmallow cream. The texture and flavor were never the same. Popcorn balls. Popcorn balls were the most economical Christmas candy you could make. Popcorn was cheap, sugar was cheap, and the result was impressive. You'd make a sugar syrup with sugar, corn syrup, butter, and water, cook it to the hardball stage, then pour it over a huge bowl of freshly popped popcorn. Working quickly with buttered hands, you'd shape the coated popcorn into balls while it was still warm. This was often a job for kids, supervised carefully to avoid burns. The balls would harden into crunchy, sweet spheres that tasted like caramel corn but held together. In 1975, a batch cost about 30 cents, roughly $2 today. Popcorn balls disappeared in the 1980s when they became associated with Halloween instead of Christmas, and parents grew suspicious of homemade treats that weren't individually wrapped. Food safety paranoia killed popcorn balls faster than any change in taste preferences. Marzipan fruits. Marzipan fruits were miniature edible sculptures, realistic enough to fool you from across the room. Almond paste was kneaded with powdered sugar until smooth, then shaped into tiny apples, pears, strawberries, bananas, whatever fruit you could imagine. The real artistry came in the painting. Food coloring mixed with a little vodka created translucent paints that dried quickly, leaving vibrant, glossy colors. You'd paint each piece carefully, adding details like apple stems or strawberry seeds, creating miniature works of art that were almost too pretty to eat. In 1975, making marzipan fruits cost about $2, roughly $12 today, because almond paste was expensive. These were considered luxury gifts, something you'd give to impress someone. Marzipan fruits disappeared because they were labor-intensive and required artistic skill most people didn't have. The tradition survived in European candy shops, but vanished from American home kitchens. Almond toffee. Almond toffee was the upgraded version of regular toffee, made with almonds added in 2 stages for maximum flavor and texture. First, chopped almonds were stirred into the toffee while it was cooking, adding crunch and richness throughout. Then, after spreading the toffee onto a pan and topping it with chocolate, more roasted almonds were sprinkled on top. The result was a candy with layers of flavor and texture: crisp toffee, creamy chocolate, and crunchy almonds. In 1975, a batch cost about $1, roughly $6 today, making it one of the more expensive candies to make. Almond toffee disappeared because the technique required precision and skill, and most people weren't confident working with molten sugar at 300 degrees. Commercial almond toffee like almond roca filled the gap, but it was never as good as the homemade version. Cream mints. Cream mints were the easiest candy in this entire list, which makes it strange that they disappeared. You'd mix powdered sugar, softened butter, and peppermint extract. Roll the mixture into small balls, press them slightly with a fork, and let them dry overnight. The next morning, they'd have a slightly firm outer shell with a soft, creamy center that dissolved on your tongue. They were usually served after dinner as a palate cleanser, set out in a small candy dish alongside coffee. In 1975, a batch cost about 40 cents, roughly $2.50 today. Cream mints disappeared because the ritual of after-dinner mints at home became old-fashioned. By the 1980s, mint was something you grab from a bowl at a restaurant, not something you serve in your own dining room. But homemade cream mints had a pure peppermint flavor and a melt-in-your-mouth texture that store-bought mints never achieved. Toffee. Toffee is one of those candies that's unforgiving. You either nail it perfectly or you end up with a sticky mess. Real toffee requires cooking butter and sugar to exactly 300 degrees, the hard crack stage, then pouring it quickly onto a parchment-lined pan before it has a chance to set. If your temperature is even slightly off, the toffee will either stick to your teeth or taste burnt. If you hesitate for even a second while pouring, it'll harden the pot and you'll be left scraping. When done right, though, toffee is crisp, buttery, and rich, often topped with chocolate and chopped almonds. In 1975, a batch cost about 80 cents, roughly $5 today. Toffee disappeared from home kitchens because the technique was difficult and risky. Heath bars were convenient and consistent, and nobody wanted to risk wasting ingredients on a candy that might not turn out. But homemade toffee, when made correctly, is infinitely better than any Heath bar, with a deeper butter flavor and genuine crispness. Chocolate truffles. Chocolate truffles sound fancy, but they're actually one of the easiest candies to make. The recipe is just 2 ingredients: heavy cream and good chocolate. You heat the cream until it simmers, pour it over chopped chocolate, let it sit for a minute, then stir until smooth. The mixture, called ganache, gets chilled for a couple hours until it's firm enough to scoop. Then you roll into balls with your hands and coat them in cocoa powder. The result is a velvety, melt-in-your-mouth truffle that tastes rich and luxurious. In 1975, a batch cost about $1.50, roughly $9 today, but by the 1980s, chocolate truffles had become a symbol of expensive gourmet candy, sold in fancy boxes for several dollars per piece. People forgot they originated as a simple home candy that anyone could make. The irony is that homemade truffles taste better than most commercial ones because you can use high-quality chocolate and control the cocoa content. We're getting close to the end, and these final candies were the ones that required real skill. If your grandmother made any of these, she wasn't just following a recipe. She was showing off. Peanut butter fudge. Peanut butter fudge was the American version of chocolate fudge, made with sugar, milk, peanut butter, and butter, cooked to the soft ball stage at 236 degrees. The technique was identical to chocolate fudge. Cooked to temperature, cooled to 110 degrees without stirring, then beat vigorously until it loses its shine and thickens. The cooling step was critical. If you skipped it or stirred too early, the fudge would be grainy and disappointing. When done right, peanut butter fudge was smooth, creamy, and tasted intensely of roasted peanuts with a sweet, buttery finish. In 1975, a batch cost about 80 cents, roughly $5 today. Peanut butter fudge disappeared as chocolate fudge dominated, and the traditional technique using a thermometer was abandoned in favor of easier marshmallow cream recipes. Regional variations survived in places like the South, but nationwide, peanut butter fudge became a forgotten specialty. Candied orange peel. In the 1970s, nothing went to waste, and candied orange peel was proof of that philosophy. After juicing oranges, you'd save the peels and boil them 3 times in fresh water to remove the bitterness. Then you'd simmer the peels in sugar syrup for an hour or more until they became translucent and completely infused with sweetness. Some people dipped the finished strips in dark chocolate, which added richness and made them look fancier. The flavor was intensely orange with a slight bitter edge, and the texture was chewy and candied. Best of all, the candy cost almost nothing since you were using something that would normally be thrown away. Maybe 40 cents in 1975, roughly $2.50 today. Candied orange peel disappeared because it was time-consuming and the bitter flavor wasn't popular with kids. Modern life moved too fast to spend an afternoon boiling orange peels, and people stopped seeing value in using every part of an ingredient. The Christmas candies from the 1970s weren't just recipes. They were traditions, passed down through generations, each one carrying memories of kitchens filled with the smell of melting sugar and the sound of wooden spoons scraping pots. These candies disappeared not because they stopped being delicious, but because we stopped having time to make them. If you remember any of these, or if your family made something special that I didn't mention, leave a comment below. And if you want to see more forgotten recipes from the past, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Next up, we're diving into 25 forgotten Thanksgiving side dishes that your grandmother made. Dishes that used to be holiday staples, but have completely disappeared from modern tables.